I updated the page that I had posted for that lecture, so it's previously just a stub page, which is mostly just like this link right here. I put together a nice kind of walkthrough of a whole bunch of the steps that I did. I still had to fill in this stuff down here, which is largely going to be stuff that we cover again today, so I'm going to kind of back up a little bit to the point where I bring up an interpreter or a Metasploit again and do that work. One of the questions that one of the students had was, as you recall, I went through how to get the old versions of Windows that were vulnerable last class. I did not go through how I got the old versions of Adobe Flash. So one of the things that I will say that's very helpful is that a lot of the software vendors that provide the web viewers and things like that, they actually have available, it's not easy to find, but they do have available an archive of a lot of the old versions of their software. So what I actually put in the page, which is linked in the announcement, is this, these two links. So this one is kind of in context to what he was asking about, which is literally, so they do this so that if you are developing a Flash movie, it's extremely common. This is why a lot of these attacks actually work, is it's extremely common for people, so customers of yours on the internet, to be using many older versions of Flash Player, many different versions. So you can actually go through here and they basically have Flash Player archives. So, you know, this one's the most recent one released at the end of last year, all the way down to these super old versions that are right here. So you can go all the way to Flash Player 2, Flash Player 3, Flash Player 4. But, you know, kind of more contemporary, they have the Flash Player versions of Flash 10 and higher that have been released since, this one actually, yeah, have been released since 2010. So they actually have, and it looks like they actually have versions of Flash Player 9 from them as well. They also have old versions for Android and stuff like that too. So you can test against those. So the net benefit for us is this gives us a whole bunch of example cases for putting something together. So I have this page linked here. Another one they have, which I'll go here, is actually an FTP site. So let me actually see if this works through the FTP. It may not. So it looks like, for whatever reason, I can't, let's see. Yeah. So there might actually be some issue with using FTP through UC's network. What is handy is that I actually pulled copies of all these down. So what I can do, at least for this one, which I was going to show you. So number one, you might want to try using this with say off-campus, Starbucks, something like that. For the Adobe Acrobat Reader versions, basically they have every single version of Acrobat Reader also hosted on their site. Likewise, if you go to Firefox's website or Mozilla's website, you can get all the old Firefox versions. Ditto for Chrome, you can get all the different Google Chrome versions if you go there. So, and I can pick those up and drop them maybe in, say, drop them on here later on as well. We aren't really touching on any of those for this particular exercise. But that was a good question. I actually thought about it when I was putting this material together over the weekend. So I stuck it in here. The other thing I did was I actually put together a web scraper that actually pulled down every single archive that is available there. Unfortunately, the one associated with, I think, Flash Player came out to be 68 gigabytes. and then Adobe Acrobat Reader ended up being another like 30 gigabytes or something, which is close to 100 gigabytes. So it's a lot of data. So I might just pull out like a subset of them to host for and provide to you all. Or one of the things too that you'll notice when we went through, or you would have noticed when we went through the Adobe Flash, was that there are actually, let's see, I'll just jump down to the Flash section. So there's actually number one, all of those archives that are on the site that I showed you have the Windows versions, the Mac versions, the Linux versions, I think, and then also developer versions or developer copies for every single one of them. So if I just extract out like these two archives from every single one of them, which is the two Windows installers, that might actually shrink the size down to under 10 gigabytes or something. And that may be sufficient for everyone. So anyway, yeah. Yeah, so the host name of your, yeah. Yeah. Let me see. So, are you talking about in the actual like Windows OS itself? Or, yeah. Yep. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So let me see this one. So, are you talking about in here? Yeah. So, like, so the question is, can we change the UI change? Can we change the host name of the Windows machine? So I was under the impression that you can do that somewhere here. Computer name? Virtual is only internet adapter. Okay. Let me just see what, which one I got. Yeah, yeah. Okay, virtual box hosting is internet adapter. Yeah. So it doesn't let you change that. Yeah. So I'll show you. You're talking about in the network settings itself. So if you are in the network settings and you want to create a host-only adapter, this also creates. So I'm going to open up the Explorer window in my Windows host right now. Oh, whoops. That's how to do that. I think it's actually settings. Come on. No, I can go with it. It's down here somewhere. With the network and internet settings, I'm gonna. You can't see it on the WebEx, and I don't know how to share this, but this is basically right-click on the network, the little Wi-Fi icon, or the network, jack icon, depending on how you're connected. And then I'm bringing up the settings for network. If I go over here to, I believe, change connection properties. No, not this connection. So, back up. It's I think it's this maybe? Yeah, so change adapter options. If I'm in, this is Windows 10 again. So if I'm in Windows 10, I go to the right-click on the Wi-Fi thing, and then chose the change adapter options. that brings up the list of network adapters that, you know, if you do basically go to network properties on older versions of Windows, you get through here too. This allows you to see the different network adapters that are available. So what happens is VirtualBox creates this, which is basically a virtual network jack that's plugged into the same switch as your virtual machines are connected to. I do not know how, I mean, I imagine that there's, let's see. So I think you can rename it here maybe? I don't know. So let's try this. So there we go. I'm going to cancel this. And then let's just see what happens. Let's just see what that does. So I might actually have to save the machine state. So there's a little bit advanced options here, hard mode. So it still, for whatever reason, retains that interface name.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think also, let me go in, what do I have to show these windows individually? So if I go here, I believe there's host network manager. So I can create doesn't let you change the name though, but you can actually create multiple adapters there, so that then when you, yeah. Bring it back. So I'm just going to do a quick connectivity test just to show you this thing. Because here we go. Because I do things shut down for the last class. So here we go. Hide this window. Blocking my view. Alright. So yeah, so that was kind of messing. I suppose you know, one of the times where that comes in handy, I'll show you, is this, right? So one of the things that can be kind of challenging about this one is that if you can do like that, something. Yeah, I can't remember exactly how to do it, but if you use the command line tools or something like that in Windows, Ethernet adapter has you know, these names that have spaces in it that can be kind of difficult to use, and also difficult to just constantly have to retype. This is actually why on Linux you end up having much more helpful Ethernet 0 like you do up there. Just
network settings
Mhm.
to internal only.
Yeah.
And I think that host only is by default nowadays.
Yeah.
You can set it up.
Yeah. So yeah. So host only is the default for, I believe, the Kali Linux VM. I don't know if when you create a new, I think that might just be my doing because that's how I had it set up. And as I said, the big difference between the internal networking and the host-only networking is that I actually get a network adapter that's on my laptop here that virtually plugs me into the same switch as my VM. That gives me the ability to communicate directly with the VMs using my laptop. So outside of the scope of malware analysis, VirtualBox has that feature so that I can maybe run a application server or something like that inside a virtual machine, and then I want to test it from the web browser that I have on my laptop, just like I was going to visiting a website or something like that. So it's a really popular, or it's a really common use case. The other one that some people use as well, although just because of internal optimization, it's not perfect, is using that as a way for sniffing network traffic as well. So if the VMs are talking to one another, you can sometimes sniff network traffic. I will say that if you do try to use your host to sniff network traffic when two VMs are talking to one another, in VirtualBox that is a bit imperfect, just because it'll virtualize the network at the kernel level, and your application that's doing the sniffing from your host may not see all the traffic, because traffic optimization in the kernel may actually cause it to go completely in software and not like use the kernel. So just be aware of that. That's I believe that's actually errata that's mentioned in the VirtualBox manual when they talk about networking, and they talk about the traffic capture features that are in it. But it's something that that can be a gotcha. So if I was running Wireshark on my laptop, I would not necessarily be guaranteed to be able to see the network traffic, unfortunately. So, all right. So the other thing that I had mentioned last week was about homework, and I think I'm just going to do it this week. I wanted to get it done at the end of the attack example, and that took longer last lecture than I expected it to. So because of that, I'm going to complete that today, and we'll have an assignment that basically is a combination of those two, because experience last semester or last year was that just building up a lab was a rather trivial project assignment. So, great. So anyway, I'm going to pick up where we left off. As I said, I have this documented now as well for you all. So basically this documents more or less the steps I ran through. The one difference is that I might have ended up using different IP addresses. And then the other thing that I did here, because I reran the attack, the other thing I did here that's different is I just used the host-only network. I mean, internal network. Yep. So, which for this example doesn't really make much of a difference. The other thing I did here was I included, the different commands I ran. And finally, I thought that I had the what we call the execution chain documented in here, but I might not have. If I don't, I will add it. Okay. Yep. I don't have it documented in here. It's probably on a newer version of this. So, but we'll talk through it. So, anyway, I'm going to back up to, I'm actually going to exit this, and we'll jump back into this because to get here took a large amount of the previous class. So, running the exploit's actually not that difficult. So I'll let it pop up. The other thing that I was just going to also share with you all, and I'll make sure it gets into the documentation, is that when I load up Internet Explorer, one of the other features that's in here, this is shared, is the Internet options. So on newer versions of Internet Explorer, you have what's called security levels, where they basically allow you to provide security levels. I actually dropped these just because it increases the likelihood of success. Then there's also this protected mode option, which you can turn off. This actually is a feature that is supposed to, if there's any code running inside the web browser, it prevents access to write any data to the system without, say, the user's permission. So to kind of simulate this running in a, quote-unquote easier environment, because really what we're trying to do is collect the malware and everything like that. So I'm not trying to teach everyone how to secure their computers. It's important to turn those down. So for the internet, I turned off this feature. For local internet, I also turned off this feature and dropped this below. Trusted sites did the same thing. Then restricted sites, you can't change this. But to be fair, I don't have a list of restricted sites actually stored on the VM. So, it does not let you change this for restricted sites, which is, good security practice. But to be fair, I don't have any restricted sites stored on the VM. So this is where if you, as a user, are coming across websites that you think are bad, or your employer who controls your Windows instance feeds websites that they feel are bad into this setting, or if you subscribe to a blacklist or something like that, you might have an application that's automatically filling this with contents from that blacklist. But the big ones is just kind of dropping the functionality here. We'll say that feature is what was preventing me from being able to move files to and from the system during the end of the last class, and I didn't get to kind of jump in there and turn it off. Older versions of Windows, like Windows XP, don't have that, and also some web browsers don't have that functionality. So anyway, so what I would end up doing is I would go back to using this exploit here. So multi-browser, I'll just search for, so if you remember, we can actually search for these things. So the other thing that I'll also add is that there are some exploits that are available. I believe there's a few of them in here, but there are also others out there on the internet that can actually bypass that feature. So it's a really good example of a mitigation that was put in place, and then as soon as it was put in place, people came up with malware that can get around it. So one of the reasons I didn't use that exploit for this is the one that I found did work against it, did not work very consistently, which is also a problem. When you're breaking software, you are very often causing the software to enter unpredictable state. That's how you get into exploit territory, is the author of the software expected the software to behave one way, you made it behave a different way that gave you access to run remote code on it. Because of that, you'll see that a lot of these exploits that are available, the rank columns are a really good example of it. I'll actually search for just, is it Adobe Flash to give you a better list of this, is that you can see that there's normal, good, and great. Those are rankings that are built in to talk about the success level, or they factor in success level and a number of other characteristics. Very often, you may have an exploit that 75% of the time works, or 33% of the time works, and stuff like that. And it's just it's almost like a luck of the draw, but it's like, 33% means that if I hit 6 people, guaranteed almost to get one of them, very likely to get 2 or 3 of them, that type of thing, right? But when I'm trying to do in-class example, that can get very tedious and annoying. So I'm going to stick with the ones up here that said they were great, and I'm going to go back to using this one. So I think both of these are the same. I don't know why I listed it twice. So I'm going to use this exploit, and as we saw, there's these things, so I'm going to go and grab my IP address again. And then the URI. So this is maybe what the what the exploit's going to be shared out of when I visit it. And then finally, I want to choose a payload. So I used the default payload before, but I'll actually show you how to. Where I've got the hand icon right now is the instructions for doing payload. So we can actually. You can see that Windows/interpreter. There we go. So I may want to do this one. Payload Windows interpreter reverse TCP. So set payload. Whoops. But the payload I'm using, that's the same one I used before. So I'm going to do the show options. Now, in addition to the options I was looking at before that are up here, it's got these. So do the same thing I did before, which is like this. Set it here, and then I do run, and then this is going to tell me that it is waiting for somebody to try and reach and download this. So go here. And then you can see that the session opened. So now we've got a session open. From this person's perspective, it looks like it's still loading the page. And then, as I showed, we'll actually load this up again too, is that this is one of the neat things too, is that it looks like a blank page. What it actually has is it has embedded objects. So you have the Shockwave Flash object here, and then you have a number of parameters that are sent to it. So these parameters are actual like options that are sent to the Flash player. So some of them, like this, allow script access always, controls the script access. Play means start playing it as soon as it's shown. A lot of this technique that's used is some of the reason why many of you might have noticed in some of the newer browsers like Firefox and so forth, if there's Flash content in a web page, it now puts up that big play icon over the top of it by default to basically make you kind of opt in to playing the Flash. That's because basically like this strategy was used a lot. So again, this approach is also not going to be very effective on some of the newer browsers that have that type of mitigation where it doesn't autoplay Flash. A lot of advertising companies are very upset with this, but it looks like the browser folks won out. So the other thing that's interesting about this one is this feature here, which I don't know if you can see it. I don't even know if I can increase the, yeah, here we go. So we'll get a larger size, right? So this feature here that I had selected actually made it a 1x1 video. So this construction is actually very helpful for being able to put together an HTML page. And I would almost say this itself constitutes a form of malware. It's almost like a first stage carrier or initial carrier. Hypothetically, you could actually have this code injected into a website of company whose web server you broke into or something like that, which is actually a very common strategy. And then anybody who visits that web page basically has this run. They don't see an element on the page that indicates that this is running at all. And in fact, if it's placed properly, you know, this loading kind of spinner might occur, but the page will still render and everything like that. So, you know, that's helpful. So the other thing here is that it delivers this Flash file, the Shockwave Flash document here as well. So that's the second artifact from this attack that's put together. So you got the HTML side, you've got this Flash artifact as well, and then on top of that you have, however they got an interpreter running on here, which I'll be honest, I can't remember how the packaging works with this particular exploit. But we will jump in. So I'll do sessions 1. That'll give me the ability to. So give me the ability to, do stuff here. So I might want to. I actually have like a number of tools that are like kind of mounted right here. So I might, want to. It's got like a whole bunch of malware stuff in here that I've pulled from all sorts of places. So, I could put any one of these things over there if I wanted. I can also navigate the system, right? So, I can go and look in the user's documents, for instance. It's my documents. I'm going to save one of those. Yeah, it's my documents. So, or maybe I can't. I think that's because this user doesn't. Oh no, it is documents. So one thing you do have to be aware of is that some of the shorthand for cmd.exe may not necessarily work because we are using these are commands that are actually built into the interpreter shell, so it has a limited set of options. If you want to get into the actual system with a command line, you can do this, and then I can do, normal things. So, downside of that is that I don't have access to the other handy commands like, I'll just help, and then if you see them, like a bunch of these. So I don't have access to like the webcam commands or the key scan commands or the upload, download commands and things like that. So, what I might end up doing is
when you got access to the user's desktop, could you answer the remote desktop before you use it?
Yeah, if I wanted to, so that would be one thing that I could do. The question was, if I have access to the user's desktop, could I, for instance, launch a remote desktop session from the user's computer? So one of the things I could do, I'm looking through the commands right now, forwarding, say, looks like I don't necessarily have a command for, that's like kind of a one-shot for making RDP open up. But one of the things that I was going to show you all is that if I happen to, I'll just go over here and, if I happen to have another Windows system another Windows VM, for instance. I'll start this one up. What the hell is it? I can actually use some other tools if I want to basically make a I can actually use some other tools to create, say, a more featureful backdoor. If I want to get kind of more interactive access to the system. So this is where kind of the purpose of Meterpreter, ends up being primarily a kind of initial, I should say, a quick and dirty navigation tool. So I have a number of commands here that are, some of them are common commands like the git system. I don't know if git system actually works for me yet. Yeah, see, I can't do it. If the computer was vulnerable to that particular attack. There we go. Then I could use it. So I can do this maybe. And on desktops, that shows me the number of desktops. So for instance, if this computer had multiple users opening up remote desktop sessions to it, they might show up on here, or if it was a multi-desktop system, they might be available there. I can take a screenshot of it. I can actually move the, so I can do git desktop. So I can actually change the, I don't know what that, this nomenclature is, so apologies for that. But the idea here is that if you saw earlier, I got to enumerate the number of desktops. So if you think of a computer that may have multiple users logged in at the same time because maybe it's a shared system, they each have a unique ID. When I broke in, depending on my level of access to the system and the user's rights, I might be able to hop between the different desktop sessions that are going, which could give me access to some critical, like in-memory details, like passwords. It would give me insight into, say, which keyboard that I would be monitoring if I was trying to do like keyboard monitoring, that type of thing, because multiple terminals ends up being multiple keyboards as well, right? So I get access to all that type of information through here. However, a lot of these are quick, like one-shot commands that are really common. But if I want a more general purpose access, there's a lot of other tools out there that actually provide you with that access. And so one of them that better restart this one. One of them that I'm going to show you here shortly, when this comes back up. And so this is where having multiple, or I should say a lot of times you'll see attackers, when you're doing analysis, it looks like there are multiple desktops involved and things like that. A lot of times the putting together tooling for the attack and stuff like that sometimes can involve like maybe staging a Windows control or something like that, as well as maybe a Linux system that's being used for part of the attack. So in this case, I'm actually going to bring in another tool. Just let this, I'll let this come up for a moment. Yeah, and then I probably should have done one more thing, which is this. I'm going to jump over here and go over. So. I think I actually have one of these listed here. So going back to the slides for a moment, I'm going to go down here. A lot of these we went through. The one I didn't go through yet is so this stuff down here is that kind of after we get initial access, it might be valuable for us to, let me see. Is this is a full HIPAA one, is it? Yeah, it's the full HIPAA. So, good, and this one isn't blocked. So, so this is, Malware Labs is a research company, but this particular article, which is linked in the slides, discusses a free for download tool that was used for basically providing remote access, so kind of similar to remote desktop. The nice benefit to a tool like this is it'll actually run within the session of the logged in user. So you get kind of that access, but you'll also get to maintain a decent amount of stealth with it too. And so for that type of access, this might be a tool that you're more likely to encounter than just somebody kicking off a remote desktop session that's easy to disable by policy. So we'll go over here. And I'll get this installed. So what I'm doing is pretend to be the attacker here for a moment. I'm loading up another virtual machine, which I'm going to use in parallel with the Metasploit machine in order to install a new backdoor on it that provides a lot greater level of access to the system for the operator than just like the interpreter shell that has a lot of very simple commands. In order to do that, I have to get the extensions installed, which for some reason they were not installed on the system yet. And then I'll go here, and I want to steal the same folder settings that I'm using for this. So downloads happen. Okay. Go here. Downloads. Okay. Set folder. There we go. Okay. So this way, if system will restart, we'll have access to the shared folder. The other thing that I'm also going to do, I'm going to bring this up again. Then this. I'm going to drop this tool, which is Netcat, which I downloaded, I think, previously. I'm just going to put it in this folder as well so that it's available. So for instance, when I'm in here, I'm going to switch my, so I use LCD, local CD to change what path I'm running commands from on my Linux system, and then inside of the computer it would be, you know, the normal CD, so you need PWD, where am I? So I'm in documents, so I might want to do, the other thing that's nice about this is it shows you the permissions here too. So I'm going to make that repeat. What I might end up doing is I might go into, say, templates, and then upload mc.exe, which basically puts that Netcat tool that I downloaded, you know, puts it right here, right? And so then, oops, I can actually open up a shell, and it puts me in the same directory that I was in. Oh. Is it not in there? Yeah. But I might have lost my session to really not. I'll just upload to here, and then we'll see if that works. So one of the interesting things too about a Windows system, this is something I'm running into, is you'll see that the searches here has some permissions where the user doesn't have permission to write to it. For some reason this one does, but I still wasn't able to write to it. I don't know why. But you can see that Netcat was installed here. So can work. So it's basically like the netcat tool, right? And so if I wanted to, I could, netcat L, get a port number, something like that, and then it's listening, and so then I can feasibly connect to it. I think I gave a demo of this. So there's a netcat, right? So then I can do 2, 6, 8. Thing. Here it is. Okay. You might not be able to get that one working, but anyway, that's kind of, the goal here was really just to get a tool that I could run on there. There could possibly be some permissions issues with that user that aren't letting me run just kind of normal network tools, that type of thing. So this is a good kind of demonstration of that. Because sometimes user policy may prevent normal tools from working. That's where having some more kind of advanced tools, like the one I'm about to show you if Windows came back up, actually does help us. So I'm going to go in here and it's going to be over here, network. There we go. So vbox SVR, and then I hit save. There we go. So this is a compressed archive. I'll just pull it over here. So this ends up being okay. So of course this thing goes and gets mad because it might have done something. I think this, you know what, I know it's good down here. This is a new VM, so I need to actually run this. Probably have to do this one. So again, as you can see, that a lot of these features do work pretty well. And then here, and then probably Windows particularly. Just tools, options, this. So, apologies for that. There we go. Program turned off. I don't know why it's not visible in there. So now, do this. Okay. So then this gives me the ability to run this program. And so what this program is, it's actually a really common malware construct. This is a controlling program. So what I'm going to be provided with is a console that I'm expecting to be able to control computers from. But in order to do that, I first need to create a new listener, which is this. So I'm going to maybe give it the listen port of like 1, or maybe we'll do this, 7038, because that'll make it easy to remember. So I'll listen on this port. That basically sets up a session inside of this Windows system. So again, this is the Windows instance that I created as an attacker. I'm just going to show you. So you can see 7038 right here is listening. So basically it's going to be waiting for connections to come in. I believe also that when I do this, so you can set a password if you want. There's a lot of different configuration settings that you can choose. We'll say that a lot of times when we're dealing with malware out there on the internet, they have the same type of project management problems that a lot of us do, where you need to kind of have names for your projects and stuff like that. You have like user management for the folks who are on that project, and also to exclude folks who aren't on that project and things too. So they'll actually have cases where like they'll implement security passwords and stuff like that, which may not do much from like a concealment perspective. Doesn't add too much stealth to the project, but it does prevent, say if you have a console where, or you have check-ins coming from multiple places, and you have maybe one person whose job it is to focus on one target and another person to focus on the other target, it prevents them from being able to mess with each other's targets. But likewise, you can give it IDs like, this one I might give it a example like, what is it, 0123 or something, just for today's date, and then also profile. So, I might call this one general example. There's a whole bunch of other things that exist as well, and the neat thing too is it provides like help. Process hijacking is a method to bypass some firewalls by replacing the trusted process image by the stub one. So if you remember when we played with the Windows firewall settings back, it was like early last week or late the week before, the Windows firewall settings allow you to control things by IP, by domain, and then also by process name. So if you have policies set up where you know that maybe the target has a authoring tool or a rendering tool or something like that that needs access to the internet, and a firewall hole has been poked in the Windows firewall for that, you can actually use, in this case, process hijacking to basically take over that process and then inherit all of its permissions. So you can transfer your code into that process space, which is a feature that exists in Windows process management for some reason. I do not know why. There was probably some legitimate use case for that quite some time ago. So the other thing that needs to happen is I need to go and tell it where to connect. So this, just like my other ones, has its own IP address, and it was actually given .5. Too bad I can't copy that. So 3.5. So I'm gonna also you can see that some of the more anticipated features in a user interface are absent here. So, and then of course it shows the port 7038. So we're the network settings. Has a bunch of information where you can have it install itself into another place if you want. So this allows you to, for instance, after you get the thing running, it'll go and install itself somewhere. You can actually have it create itself as a hidden file, things like that, so that maybe with default settings, Explorer can't see it. You can have it change its creation date. So for instance, if my computer seems like it's acting hacked, right, one thing I might do is go and try and find any files that have happened since it started acting weird. That's a real common IR action, so there's some ways around that. So again, this provides a whole bunch of features way above and beyond I'll just put this on the desktop, right? It has a lot of features way above and beyond what was available through the interpreter shell. So you can have like a keylogger. You can add things to the host file. So for instance, when the user wants to visit www.msn.com, you can inject an override for that. So instead of going to the normal IP address, they might go to an IP address you control. So you can steal their login credentials for MSN and stuff like that. So it allows you to choose an icon. So for instance, a lot of people like Facebook, right? So why not do that? And then also has a bunch of ways of putting the extension on the end. One of the interesting things about this that you'll learn, and I learned actually happenstance, is that in Windows you can actually name the exe any number of names. Windows will actually look at the file signature and the contents to find out what type of file it is in a lot of cases. And you can do that with document formats and stuff like that. So that's kind of a bit of an unintuitive thing. For instance, if it ends up getting put with like a .pif, a screensaver file is really just a Windows program with just a different file name extension. But that's not readily apparent to a lot of users either, so it's a real common one for people to use. And then it gives you the ability to compress it and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to do what's called building the stub or generating, and I'm just going to put this on the, actually, I'll put it out here, right? So I'm going to actually just generate it into the hacking folder, and I'll call it like mydc.exe. So then it goes through all the different things. Oh, it might not like it because Windows Defender, I'm not, this is my computer. So I will show you how to do it instead, which is, I'm going to put it on the desktop of this computer. No, there we go. Sorry, mydc.exe. Right. I'll do this with it. So now I didn't get that warning. It's available on here. So a common thing that happens as well is that, yeah, it's right here. So here it is with the Facebook icon and everything. So let me send to maybe this. Then can I actually remember where it is. Pretty different. So this was actually a compressed folder, I think. Oh, I can't do it that way. Oh wait, maybe I do this. What I'm trying to look for here is if I can encrypt the file at all. So something else that I might want to do is try and do the trick I was showing earlier, which is I showed it. Oh, there we go. So yeah, I can maybe do this and then redirect it to that, and then what I might want to try doing in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the net tag. So I'm really not very familiar with the new interface. So here we go. So we go here, and then I have net cut, and not here. The user interface for this is very agitating. Yeah, I know that's on. Okay. So then what I might end up doing is something like that. And then let's see if it didn't do it. Anyway, well, I think that this is messing with me, so apologies for that. And that's you know what? Probably use the wrong. I believe I used the wrong IP address. Just incoming. Yeah, there we go. So I have it over there. Then what I'll do is I'll just go back to the interpreter shell, LCD to my home directory, and then I'm going to upload my out.exe to the compromised Windows system. So like that. Okay. So I need it on here on the attacker's Windows system because I need to have it here in order for this tool to work. Let me just make sure that I didn't end up causing something else to break. Here, I want to make sure that it's still listening. So then, unbeknownst to the user, we still got, this stuff running behind the scenes, right? So all this stuff happening in the background on their computer is that then ultimate test is going to run this and actually have it work. So one thing, I don't know if you caught it, but this folder actually just showed up on there. And that was one of the configuration options. The other thing that happened is now we have a connection that so we just told this computer, the Windows host, the target, we just told it to connect back to here, to the Windows system that the attacker set up and was running this Dark Comet program on. So then what we can do is we actually have all of these, I should double click on it, and we have all of these things in here, including something called fun functions, which allows you to, if I remember, these things are actually kind of amusing. They're called fun functions. A lot of them are actually like user annoyance type things. The other thing you can do is, let's see, spy functions maybe, to webcam, remote desktop. So the question was about like remote desktop and everything, allows you to actually see, what all is going on. So then what I can do is I can, so if you remember, this is what I've got going on, right? I'm trying to remember so I actually have to go in here, control mouse clicks, control keyboard. So I think I do have that stuff enabled. Yep. So actually you can see, so I can say like, hello, user. I don't know if it's going to work or not. But you can see I'm actually able to, I think I've got some problem going on. Oh yeah, that's right, I can't type in there, but I can see if this works. Okay. So I can do like this, right? So I basically go and like hold a conversation with the user, or better yet, I can actually start watching what they're doing. So one thing that's real common is to have features and capabilities in these tools that allow somebody to monitor what someone's doing, because that's how you learn what's important about that person's work, say what bank they use, or what tools they're using for doing some of their engineering projects and things like that. But then, kind of rolling back to the beginning of this attack, we had Metasploit set up a web server that was hosting an HTML file that is available here. Right, this is an HTML file right here. That HTML file delivered this Shockwave Flash exploit. And then, using that Shockwave Flash exploit, a copy of the Meterpreter shell got on here. So, you know, I don't know, I might be able to, let's see, so date modified. Maybe if I look for today, I might actually be able to find some of this stuff. I'm not entirely certain. Yeah, date modified. Actually, it would have been, no, it would have been today. But, you know, then again, I might not be able to find it on the whole system. Let me try this again. This, yeah. I can't remember. Oh, there we go. So, drive's not indexed. It's going to take a while. Kind of what I was showing here is just, you know, ideally this ends up retrieving a lot of the files that were modified at some point today, which if Meterpreter actually installed its own exe on disk or its own DLL or something like that on disk, that might show up in here as well. I'm trying to look for that. This is kind of like a real low-tech incident response almost to speak of. Actually doing this in a much more sophisticated manner is probably going to be what, you know, is going to be one of the things that we end up doing later on in class. So these are basically all the files that were modified today. So if I wanted to, I could, you know, I'm trying to remember how to use. So I can do like details, and then I can search by date modified. And so then the goal would be that if I find a particular, say, file that was modified at a particular point that I'm aware of. So, this next one. So for instance, these ones, right? Then if I'm looking for the Meterpreter stuff or the Shockwave Flash or any of that stuff, that would likely be earlier on in the execution machine. So somewhere further up here. There's where I try to get netcat on the machine. It's definitely before that. So, you know, I don't know. I believe that what they ended up doing is they actually deliver a small bundle of the Meterpreter shell, so it actually only lives in memory. So extracting it from memory ends up extracting another program or another artifact from memory. So you have a third artifact, which is the Meterpreter shell. And then the attacker used the Meterpreter shell to bring two more tools in. They brought netcat in to try and set up a connection between the two systems using netcat, like a very simple chat connection. Failed to work. So they fell back to building a full, I'd say like a full capability backdoor. And I'm actually going to just close the remote desktop session. And then they use that to then get basically complete access to the user's system. The interesting thing about the backdoor as well is that I put this on the desktop. So the configuration actually allowed me to have the backdoor install itself to another place. So I ran out.exe from the user's, I think, home folder. But after it ran, it actually created this other folder and then put a copy of it over here. So for instance, I did this because it's obvious. But if I was trying to conceal it, I might end up deciding that a better place for this to go might be like, you know, to go into the, say, users, you know, this user's like, you know, say documents or downloads or something like that, or even if this user ends up having administrative rights on the machine, a real popular option is to try and install it into like here, and then you could call it like, you know, Facebook Messenger or something like that, and then it would be very much, you know, very easily concealed from the user of the system. Yep. Yeah, so the Windows folder is a common one. I will say that one of the distinctions between putting it in the Windows folder and putting it in the program files folder, like putting in the subfolder of program files. So what they might end up doing is have it create like, you know, new folder that's like Facebook helper or something, right? And then put it inside the Facebook helper folder. is that these folders are very likely to be changed by end users, and so they'll vary among all the systems. But if I'm a corporate entity and I build computers and then give them to my users, all the programs that are in here are usually enumerable. So I may enumerate these ahead of time and then periodically run checks to make sure that nothing is in here that I didn't enumerate like 6 months ago when I built the image. That's something that is feasible to do there. But here it's not feasible to do for many engineering firms. So, all right, time's up. So I got to the end of that, including the backdoor example. I'll put together text about the PDF attack as well, which is also a very good popular attack vector. So I'll include that in the write-up. I'm not going to do a lecture on that. If you do want to see that, the second week lecture from the previous year has a really good kind of walkthrough on that. So you can use both of those, and then I will be getting the homework stuff together as soon as possible this week, most likely before next class. And then you'll have 2 weeks to deliver that. So. Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Let me
Just checking real quick to ask you what's the dates for adding and dropping classes and stuff. And should tonight, like